Welcome to this podcast of Super Special Kids and Cake. Yes, cake. I'm Granny Rhea.
And I'm Auntie Donia.
We're coming to you from the studios of Sacred Heart University in Fairfield, Connecticut. This podcast is brought to you by our book, Let's Talk, Navigating Communication Services and Supports for Your Young Child with Autism, published by Paul H. Brooks and available from Amazon.com.
As you know, every week we introduce a super special topic. These topics concern things that excite or aggravate us about trends in the field of special education. We may have some ideas that others don't always agree with, but we really do enjoy discussing them. Our super special topic for today is the transition from high school to whatever comes next.
Yes, and there can be a range of things that can come next. Some kids will go to college or to community college. Others may get a job or do job training. And still others may be involved in post-secondary programs for training particular vocations, or may simply be integrating into the community, perhaps moving to their own living space and finding what they will be able to contribute to their neighborhoods and communities.
And when we're looking at this transition, it's important to consider the quality of life of your super special child that is transitioning. I think parents, I know that my mother says this, I know Granny Rhea says this, that, your children are always going to be your children. Even when they're adults, you're still going to worry about them. But what we want to do is to ensure that there is maximum independence and functional everyday living. So considerations around safety, around health, around social communication, so making sure that there's a known community, looking at the interests of your child and making sure, if possible, that those interests are really expanded on and developed and supported in a way that it can be vocational. There were a young man that I know I worked with a couple of years ago who does have autism, but his family were very keen for him to study business, for him to then take over the family business. But that's not where his cognitive strengths were or his language strengths were, for that matter. And he was really interested in film. He was very interested in screenplay writing, but he had an incredible ability to name any director and describe the genre of that director. So one of the jobs we had him do as he was preparing for this transition and going to college was he actually volunteered to watch the movies that were part of a film festival and to write down the descriptions, and they were then used as the descriptions for the movie in the booklet.
Sometimes we are very fortunate in that we can find a great match for a client's interest just in our normal everyday interactions. But sometimes we're not so lucky. I worked with a group of young adults with developmental disabilities. Some had autism, some didn't. And they were all very independent. Many of them lived at home, but they made their own meals. They took public transportation by themselves and so on. But nonetheless, a lot of them had trouble finding work that was fulfilling for them. And so sometimes we have to really work hard to create a place where these individuals can find satisfactory work and make a contribution that feels meaningful to them.
And I think, Granny Rhea, your point to creating and finding that space. So I think working with the local community, and whether that's a religious group or if it's an interest that you have, for example, like let's say as a parent you love gardening and you have a group of people that do that. If there's something that that community could be involved in, it could be, as I said, like a local synagogue or a church or a mosque. So I think creating that is working to create that getting together with other parents, I think, as well, too.
Absolutely. Group action and support from other families is crucial in making these transitions work well for the young people with developmental disabilities. For those of you who have children who qualify for adult developmental disability services, which in the United States at least usually requires having some degree of cognitive impairment, may be able to find support in the local community or at the state level through developmental disability services. Services for young adults with autism who are not cognitively impaired are just emerging, and some states provide them and some don't. But for those states that don't, many families do band together and try to create work environments. You may have heard about Roses for Autism is a business that was created for young adults with autism to be able to do some meaningful, gainful work when it wasn't provided for them in the community.
There's actually a really lovely example of this in Holland, and there's a bakery, a cafe called Brownies and Downies, and they hire and support and train mostly individuals with Down syndrome, but really there are adults with autism, with other developmental disabilities that work there. And they serve coffee, tea, chocolate brownies. And it's a wonderful initiative that's supported the community both ways. So the community in terms of the individuals that need the support and the jobs, but also a better way of including the community at large as well.
Yeah, that's a great example. I have just one more example of a young man that I worked with who had a job delivering mail at a large hospital. So his job was to go to the mailroom in the morning and pick up the mail and take it to each of the departments and nurses' stations and so on throughout the hospital. And he was on the autism spectrum and had mild intellectual disability. And every morning when he went to each station, he would say exactly the same thing. Hi, I'm Sam. Here's your mail. How are you today? And on the few days that Sam didn't come, everybody in the hospital was wondering where he was. Oh, is he sick? What's wrong with Sam? He really became quite a favorite throughout the hospital. And he was doing something that was really useful, not just delivering the mail. He was delivering a little smile and a little bit of humanity to all of those very busy people each day. And he made a big difference.
That's really sweet. I love that. Our super special question for today is stuttering. And this was asked by one of our parents who has a child with autism. And she asked whether or not it's possible that her child has autism. He's verbal, but she noticed that he was also stuttering. And Granny Rhea, we know that there are lots of terms that we use to describe the same clinical feature. So stuttering, stammering, disfluency. And how do you describe this?
Well, stuttering usually involves a lack of smoothness of speech. Either the individual will repeat parts of words, like saying baby, or the individual will have pauses and blocks within his speech so that he seems to be stuck at a certain point and can't continue to complete the word or phrase that he aims to complete. The incidence of stuttering in people without other disabilities is relatively low. It's something below 1%. And it varies a great deal in severity. Of course, it can be a mild problem or it can be so severe that it really impacts the person's life. It's been in the news a bit lately because Joe Biden has been revealed as someone who stuttered as a child and for whom some of the kind of funny things about his speech that people notice now may actually be related to his attempts to hide the stuttering that still persists. So it's something that people are talking about. I guess the most important thing to know about stuttering and disabilities is that, unfortunately, having one problem doesn't mean that you won't have some other one. And we do see children who are deaf, who have autism, who are hearing impaired, who stutter. It can happen to anybody.
And I think we look at always sort of what's the priority that we need to address and how do we support the child. But if you do have a child with autism and you've noticed that there is some disfluency, to also just keep in mind that all children do go through a typical stage of disfluency where they're trying to find the words and formulate their ideas. And so often you'll see that disfluency at the beginning of the sentence, mummy, and then you'll see more fluency. I think, Granny Rhea, what you were saying about Joe Biden, I've seen that in some of the clients I've worked with where they are covert stammerers. And, I had an example of somebody that knew that they were going to stammer on k for coffee, but they hate tea, so they would always ask for tea because they knew that they would say coffee. And it doesn't, even with the treatment and the support, it doesn't necessarily ever go away, but there's a smoothness that can come. So, and they're sort of one of the techniques that you teach in therapy.
You can teach, a client can learn strategies for managing the disfluency. But for some people, not for everyone, but for some people, the underlying issue persists throughout life. And as Auntie Donia said, there are people who are covert stutterers who you wouldn't know to hear them talk that they stutter, but to them, they know that they're always managing that stutter that's just below the surface. And that, too, can be quite distressing to the person who's managing it.
And if you do have a super special child that is disfluent, it's important to, maintain attention with them, allow them the time to say what they need to say, and for the child not to feel rushed or ashamed or embarrassed by their disfluency.
And it's probably the case that, just as in most typical children, most children with disabilities who show some stuttering early in their development also do see it resolve later on. So it's not something you want to panic about. But again, if you're concerned, definitely ask a speech-language pathologist to listen to your child's speech. She'll probably give you some additional, perhaps more detailed suggestions about best ways to handle it at home. But for young children under the age of 5 or so, very often it can be a transient phenomenon.
So, Granny Rhea, what is the thing for this segment that makes us go, aargh?
Well, one thing that can be really difficult for people with disabilities are other people's expectations. One thing that a lot of people think about individuals with autism is that every one of them has some special skill. Every one of them has something like perfect pitch where they can solve problems that nobody else can solve. And although it's true that you do sometimes see this in association with autism or even occasionally with intellectual disability, it's not true for everyone.
Absolutely, Granny Rhea. And I've seen that with many of the children and the adults that I've worked with. So they may have these, not all of them, like you said, I think it's really important to note that very few of them actually had these savant skills where, for example, I knew it was the time when we still had a paper yellow pages and he memorized the yellow pages. He could tell you the name and the number. If you just sort of gave the first name, he could tell you the telephone number. Somebody else that I knew that could name every single car there was and knew where it was made. Another child, when he was doing his jigsaw puzzles, loves anything to do with countries and their capitals and sea creatures. In fact, I've got a 2.5-year-old that I'm working with now who can name every single sea creature from the picture. However, this same child is having difficulty requesting their everyday needs. He's not able to always answer what his name is. He has difficulty playing with toys. So I think it's really important that that expectation isn't there, because I think that's quite stressful. But if there are strengths that are there, absolutely sort of building on those strengths. For those children that, the young man that knew the telephone directory off by heart, there's a potential possible vocational position there for him. But I think it's important to think about the real functional skills that are needed to be learnt as well.
Yes, some of the skills are so amazing that people are kind of blinded by what this individual can do and don't understand why they can't bring that same level of skill to other relatively simple functional activities, but they can't. Calendar calculation is a very common one that we see where you can give an individual a date of any year within the last 2,000 years, and they can tell you what day of the week it was and things like that. So some of the things they do are quite amazing, but they're mysterious. We don't really understand how the individuals do them, but more importantly, they don't function in any way that helps the individual to accommodate or to contribute to their community.
And I think it's misleading as well. Like you said, Granny Rhea, I think it's then misleading because we then assume more ability, and then we make sometimes unreasonable and unfair, or have unreasonable, unfair expectations.
Yes, I think that's true. Some people call these skills savant skills, coming from a word having to do with knowledge, savant. Some people call them splinter skills. Some people just call them special skills. They can be known by a variety of names. But it's important to realize that if you do have a super special child, he won't necessarily have these kinds of skills, and it may not be such a bad thing if he doesn't. So, Auntie Donia, what's our eating cake for breakfast topic today?
So it's functional crafts, the different things that you can do at home with your super special kids that involves activities that you would maybe need to be doing that are more craft-like.
Can we think of some examples?
Sure. So, for example, if you have a chair that needs to be painted and you need to begin by just scraping it down, your child may love that activity of just sandpapering it down.
Yeah, that's a great idea. And I know many typical kids love to be involved in real household work. And in the painting example, again, we want to make sure that we prepare the child appropriately. Just like we have to prepare the surface when we paint, we have to prepare the child by giving them an old shirt to wear to keep the paint off their clothes, by reminding them that they can't put their hands in the paint or put their hands in their mouth while they're painting. Of course, if you can use a non-toxic paint, it's better to involve the child in those kinds of projects than in projects that might expose them to dangers that they may not be able to resist. But again, all that goes into the thinking about what is appropriate to allow your child to do that will be real work, not just arts and crafts for arts and crafts' sake, but that will make a real contribution and will also be safe for them.
Because, you know, with the eating cake for breakfast, we're looking at activities that you enjoy, but also that can be time efficient for you as well. So if you're decorating your home for the holidays, that could be something where they could be involved in making something with you that you would be doing anyway, but they could do it. I think with this, though, we have to also accept that it may not be as perfect as we would like it to be.
That's a great point, Auntie Donia. And I was thinking about, you know, the Martha Stewart types of home decorations. Maybe you don't want to do those. Maybe you want to try making some paper chains, which can be very pretty and very easy to make, but make a house feel very festive.
Yeah, and we've done that with like decorating Christmas trees with like fir cones, making some of the Christmas decorations, like you said, with the paper chain. So keeping it sort of simple. You can use recyclable materials as well.
Creating materials for the outdoors is also a way to think about it so that you don't have to worry so much about making your house a mess. So, for example, making a bird feeder out of a pine cone by slopping peanut butter all over it and then sprinkling some bird seed on it. Can't really go wrong with that, and it really does feed the birds. So it's something your child can enjoy, can be messy with, but without making a big mess in your house. So you might just want to think about what kinds of functional projects you can incorporate. Of course, there's nothing wrong with just plain old arts and crafts for fun and for decoration, but many children, especially somewhat older children, might really appreciate the opportunity to make a contribution to their household or community.
I agree. So, Granny Rhea, it's that time for some cake.
Cake time. Yay!
So,
what have we got today?
So today we have a vanilla cupcake with a vanilla frosting on top, I think it's a butter frosting, also from Trader Joe's.
Yes,
and
that's
also gluten-free.
Well, that's great because that means both of us can eat it, which is very nice. It doesn't always happen.
Yeah.
And I get lonesome sometimes when I'm eating cake all by myself, even though I will do it. So cheers.
Cheers
We're
without
gonna
cupcakes.
toast our cupcakes. Okay. And we hope that you have some nice cake at your house too, something that's as good as ours, and that you had to do as little work as we had to do.
Exactly, to enjoy these.
That's right. The Let's Talk About Super Special Kids and Cake podcast would like to thank our host, Sacred Heart University's School of Communication and Media Studies. We'd also like to thank our composer, Marty Eisenberg, our audio editor, Brent Morton, and our audio engineer and director of cake-based operations, Keith Stryovi.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. If you enjoyed this podcast, please give us a review.